What would you do if you found a young woman unconscious in a hospital stairwell at 2 in the morning, and the only ID on her said she was the daughter of the most dangerous man in Montreal? Norah Ashby was just a night shift orderly at Saint-Michel General, 23 years old, still wearing the same rubber-soled shoes she had owned since nursing school, the left heel held together with electrical tape she kept meaning to replace. She worked the overnight because the overnight paid $1.15 more per hour, and because her mother, Diane, had been on a waiting list for a specialist consult for 11 months. And the difference between waiting and not waiting, between catching something early and catching it late, was exactly the kind of money that lived in other people's bank accounts. She took the east stairwell every night at the start of her shift because it was faster than the elevator, and because she had learned that the fastest way from the staff locker room to Ward 3 was the route nobody else bothered with. She was halfway down the second flight when her foot caught something soft, and she grabbed the railing just in time to stop herself from going over. The girl on the landing had not made a sound. Norah crouched. Her instincts moved before her fear did, airway first. The girl was breathing shallow but steady, dark hair fanned across the concrete. She was young, maybe 16, still wearing a private school blazer with a crest on the breast pocket. Her wrist had a thin gold chain on it, the kind that costs more than a month of Norah's rent. There was a cut along her temple, not deep but bleeding steadily into the collar of her white dress shirt. Norah's hand went to the girl's shoulder. "Easy, don't move her yet, feel for response." The girl stirred. Her eyes opened halfway and found Norah's face with the unfocused look of someone surfacing from somewhere very dark. Her name came out in pieces. "Isabelle, then lower my father." Norah's chest tightened. She checked the girl's jacket pockets for a phone, a medical alert, anything. In the inner breast pocket she found a card, heavy stock, no logo, no address, a single phone number in raised silver print, and beneath it 2 words, "Emergencies only." Norah looked at the stairwell around her, empty. The overhead light buzzed once and held. She had 2 choices. She could call the emergency line downstairs and do this the correct way, which meant forms and waiting and an intake process, and a 14-year-old girl lying on cold concrete for another 8 minutes while someone found a gurney, or she could call the number. She called the number. It rang once. The man who answered did not say hello. He said, "Speak." Norah had been yelled at by surgeons, talked over by attending physicians, ignored by administrators who could not be bothered to learn the names of the people who kept their wards running. She was not easily rattled, but something in that single word made her understand with absolute clarity that the person on the other end of the line was not accustomed to being the one who received bad news. "Your daughter," she said. "She's in the east stairwell of Saint-Michel General. She's injured, and I need to know if she has any medical history I should be aware of before I move her." Silence, long enough that Norah thought the line had dropped. Then what floor? Second landing. She has a laceration on her left temple. Pupils are responsive. She's conscious but not fully oriented. She said your name and then stopped talking. I need you to tell me if she has. She doesn't. He said nothing chronic. No allergies. How bad is the laceration? Surface wound. I've seen worse. She may have a mild concussion. She needs imaging to rule out anything deeper. Who are you? A hospital orderly, Norah said, which is why I'm the one crouched on a concrete floor asking you questions instead of sitting somewhere warm. Another silence, shorter this time. Stay with her, he said. I wasn't planning to leave. The line went dead. Norah pulled her cardigan off and folded it beneath Isabelle's head. The girl's eyes had steadied a little. She was watching Norah with the careful attention of someone trained to evaluate situations quickly and quietly. She was her father's daughter in that much, at least, though Norah didn't know it yet. You called him, Isabelle said. I did. She closed her eyes briefly. He's going to be upset. He's going to be here, Norah said. That's different. Is it? Yes. Norah checked her watch. Stay awake for me, all right? Tell me something. What day is it? Isabelle told her. Then she said he doesn't like hospitals. Most people don't. He really doesn't. Norah looked at the card still in her hand. Emergencies only. She thought about the voice on the phone, the way it had gone quiet when she said the word daughter. Not quiet like shock, quiet like a man recalculating everything at once. 12 minutes later, the stairwell door at the bottom of the landing opened without sound. The man who came through it was not what she had expected, though she could not have said afterward what she had expected. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dark overcoat still carrying the cold of outside. His hair was black with threads of silver near the temples. He moved the way certain men moved when they had spent years making sure no room could surprise them. His eyes went to Isabelle first and stayed there for 3 full seconds before they came to Norah. She had been assessed by men like him before, men who walked into rooms and immediately sorted everyone in it by usefulness. It never felt good. This time it felt different, and she could not explain why. He crossed the landing and crouched beside his daughter. His hand went to her face with a gentleness so at odds with the rest of him that Norah looked away. Belle. The girl opened her eyes. Hi, Dad. His jaw moved once. How did you get here? I walked. She paused. Some of it. He looked at the cut on her temple. His hand was very still. Who did this? Isabelle's gaze shifted sideways. She didn't answer. The man looked at Norah. She felt the weight of it. I don't know, Norah said honestly. She was already here when I found her. I haven't moved her because I wasn't sure about the neck. He looked at his daughter. Can you move everything? Isabelle demonstrated slowly, each limb cooperating. He watched with the focused attention of a man reviewing damage to something irreplaceable. Then he stood, and Norah was surprised to find him looking at her again, instead of already pulling out a phone to summon people. You're the one who called. Yes. You work here. I just said that. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile. You said it like it explained something. It does, Norah said. People with that card don't usually hand it to hospital orderlies. He looked at her for another moment, then he said she needs imaging. I told you that 20 minutes ago. He did not respond to that. He crouched again and spoke quietly to Isabelle, and Norah stepped back to give them privacy, because that was the right thing to do, and because the conversation happening between them on that cold landing was not one she was supposed to hear. But she heard it anyway. Isabelle said a name, Renaud. The man went very still. Norah filed the name away without deciding to. His name was Carter Westbrook. She learned this not from him, but from the attending physician who appeared 14 minutes later with the particular urgent deference of someone who had been called by someone who did not make optional requests. The attending did not ask Norah why she was still there. He assumed she had been assigned to the situation, and she did not correct him. Carter stood outside the imaging suite with his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes on the door Isabelle had gone through. He did not check his phone. He did not make calls. He simply stood, which Norah found stranger than anything else about him. Men with that kind of power usually could not stop performing it for long enough to just exist in a hallway. She handed him a coffee from the nurse's station. He looked at it. It's bad, she said, but it's hot. He took it. He did not say thank you, but he held it with both hands, which she suspected was the closest he got. You've worked here long, he said. It was not really a question. Long enough to know the stairwells better than the elevators. He looked at her sideways. Why the stairwells? Because I'm usually running late and they're faster. She leaned against the wall. And because nobody's ever in them, which means I can get from one end of this building to the other, without being stopped 11 times. He considered this. You don't like being stopped. I like doing my job. Carter looked back at the imaging suite door. He said nothing for a while, then she told you a name. Norah didn't answer immediately. He turned toward her. His eyes were gray, the kind that made questions feel like decisions already made. It was disconcerting. She held his gaze anyway. She said a name. Norah said, I'm not sure what I was supposed to do with it. What did you do with it? I remembered it. She paused. I didn't do anything with it because it's not mine to do anything with. Something in his expression shifted, not softened, recalibrated. Most people, he said, would have asked. Most people aren't in the middle of a shift with 2 more hours to go. His mouth moved nearly. He looked back at the door. Renaud, he said quietly, is someone Isabelle was not supposed to be near. Norah heard the weight of the past tense and the present tense fighting each other in that sentence. She had heard that fight before in other voices. Her mother talked about Norah's father the same way sometimes, as if being someone you were not supposed to be near and being someone you couldn't stay away from were the same category of person. I won't ask, she said. Carter looked at her. For the first time, the assessment in his gaze was replaced by something she couldn't classify. Isabelle's imaging came back clear. No internal bleeding, no fracture, a mild concussion that required monitoring for 24 hours, and a wound that needed 4 stitches and a week of keeping it clean. The attending delivered this information to Carter with the careful precision of a man who had learned that good news still needed to be delivered carefully to certain recipients. Carter listened without expression, then he said, "She stays the night." The attending nodded immediately. Then he looked at Norah. "You're done with your shift at 7. She stared at him. It was not a question, which meant he had found out somewhere in the last 45 minutes. Yes. He reached into his coat and placed a card on the nurse's station counter beside her. Same heavy stock as the one in Isabelle's pocket. Same silver print, different number. She's going to want someone who isn't one of my people, he said, if you're willing. Norah looked at the card. She had worked double shifts for 3 years to afford her mother's medications. She had argued with billing clerks who apologized while changing nothing. She had eaten vending machine sandwiches for dinner more times than she could count because her break was 20 minutes, and the cafeteria was a 6-minute walk each way. She was not reckless. She was also not unaware that the man standing across the counter from her was offering something, and that the shape of it was not entirely clear yet. I'll stay until 7, she said, then I'll decide. Carter Westbrook nodded once, picked up his coffee, and walked down the hall toward his daughter's room without looking back. Norah picked up the card. She stayed until 7. Isabelle was a careful patient and a careful person. She asked questions the way someone did when they were used to not getting full answers and had learned to read the edges of what people were willing to say. She asked Norah about the hospital, about the night shift, about the rubber-soled shoes. She did not ask about her father. She did not ask about Renault. She moved around both subjects the way water moved around stone, finding different channels. At 4 in the morning, when the ward had gone quiet and the overhead lights were low, Isabelle said, "Did he scare you on the phone?" A little, Norah admitted. He does that. She was quiet for a moment. He doesn't know he does it anymore. She studied the ceiling, my mother used to tell him. She would say, "Carter, you answered the phone like you were expecting a threat." He thought she was exaggerating. Was she? No, Isabelle's voice was level, but she was the only person whose opinion about it he actually heard. Norah looked at her hands. "Where is she now?" Isabelle answered without hesitation, the way people did when they had made peace with a thing or decided they were done pretending they had. "She died 3 years ago, brain aneurysm. Nobody knew it was there." Norah felt the sentence land in the specific place where her own fear lived, the one she kept carefully sealed most nights because unsealing it did not help anyone. "I'm sorry." "She would have liked you," Isabelle said. "She liked people who didn't back down." That's not always a compliment. From her it was. Isabelle almost smiled. "She used to tell my father. He surrounded himself with people who agreed with him and called it loyalty. He told her she was wrong. She told him to count how many times someone had disagreed with him in the last 6 months. He stopped arguing." The room settled around them. Down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily. Someone's cart rattled past the doorway. "Why were you in that stairwell?" Norah asked quietly. Isabelle's gaze stayed on the ceiling. "I was trying to get to the 2nd floor on my own. There's a patient up here, a boy I know from school. His mother called me because she didn't know who else to call, and I didn't want to tell my father because he would have sent someone to handle it instead of letting me be there myself." She paused. "She didn't tell me the floor was wet." Norah looked at her. "That's how you felt." "I went down 3 steps and the 4th went sideways." She touched the stitches at her temple with careful fingers. "I am fine. The boy is fine. The floor was wet." Norah laughed before she could stop herself. It surprised Isabelle enough that she laughed too quietly and then winced. "Don't make me laugh," she said. "It pulls the stitches." "Sorry." Isabelle shook her head, still almost smiling. "Don't be." Carter came back at 6:30. He had changed his shirt, which meant he had gone home or had a car stocked for long nights, and the second option seemed more likely. He stood in the doorway of Isabelle's room and looked between his daughter and Norah with an expression that was impossible to read. Isabelle said she stayed. I can see that. I asked her to. Carter looked at Norah. She was gathering her bag because her shift ended in 25 minutes, and she was not going to be the kind of person who waited around for acknowledgement. He said, I'd like to speak with you before you leave. She almost said no. She was tired, her feet hurt. She had been up for 11 hours, and the bus ride home took 40 minutes, and her mother would be awake by 8 expecting a call. She had approximately no energy left for conversations with men who spoke in complete sentences that still somehow left out all the relevant information. She said, 5 minutes. He nodded. They stood in the hallway outside Isabelle's room. The morning shift was beginning to arrive, the ward shifting into its daytime register of sounds and movement. Carter stood with his back to the wall, and Norah noticed that he had positioned himself so he could see both the door to Isabelle's room and the length of the corridor in both directions. She noticed things like that. It was part of the job. You have a question, he said. I have several. She met his eyes, but I only need you to answer one. He waited. The name Isabelle, said Renaud. She studied his face. Did someone send him to find her, or did she find him herself? Carter's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Why does the distinction matter to you? Because if someone sent him, Norah said carefully, that's a different situation than a teenage girl making a choice that put her in a stairwell at midnight, and I'm not going to watch you be angry at her for the wrong thing. The hallway went quiet in the specific way it did when the surrounding noise was still present, but neither person in a conversation was hearing it anymore. Carter said no one sent him. So she made a choice. He looked at the door to Isabelle's room, one corner of his jaw tightened. Yes. Then she'll make better ones if she knows you're not going to call every choice a threat. You're telling me how to raise my daughter. I'm telling you what I saw in that room for 6 hours. She pulled her bag onto her shoulder. The rest is yours. Carter looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, and she thought he was going to give her another card, or an envelope, or something she would have to decide whether to accept. Instead, he said, Your mother, Diane Ashby. She's been waiting for a consult with Dr. Menard at the Ottawa Heart Institute. Norah went still. 11 months, he said. The waiting list has 37 people ahead of her. Dr. Menard has a cancellation Thursday. Norah's fingers tightened on her bag strap. I didn't ask you to look into that. No. Then how? Carter met her eyes. You spent the night with my daughter. You found her. You called me. You stayed. He paused, and you told me not to be angry at her for the wrong thing, when everyone else in my life either agrees with me or says nothing. His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. Finding out who you are was not difficult. Norah's chest was doing something she didn't have language for, anger and something else, something that felt dangerously close to relief, which was worse. That's invasive, she said. Yes. You should have asked. I know. He looked at her directly. I'm asking now. Thursday morning, Dr. Menard will see your mother. If you say no, I won't arrange anything else, and I won't contact you again unless Isabelle does. Norah stared at the corridor wall behind him. She thought about 11 months of phone calls and forms and politely worded letters explaining that the wait list was beyond their control. She thought about her mother's voice going a little thinner. Each time still steady, always steady but thinner. This isn't a debt, she said. No. If I find out later that it is. It won't be. She looked at him. The thing about grief she had learned in the years since her father left and her mother started carrying everything alone was that it turned certain people inward and it turned others into something deliberate. Carter Westbrook had the look of a man who had been turned deliberate by something he had not been able to stop. She recognized it because she had spent 3 years becoming the same. All right, she said. He nodded once. Thursday, she said, I want to be there. Of course. She started down the hall. She had gone 4 steps when he said her name, not Ashby, her first name which she had not given him, and which he had therefore found another way. She turned. Isabelle, he said, was right about you. Norah looked at him for a moment. What did she say? That you were the kind of person who stayed. She held his gaze for one beat too long, then she turned and walked toward the elevator, and she did not look back because she had learned a long time ago that looking back at things that could complicate your life was how they became the kind of complications you couldn't undo. She looked back anyway, just once at the end of the corridor. He was still standing there. The Ottawa Heart Institute did not smell like Saint Michel General. There was no overworked coffee machine by the admissions desk, no fluorescent flicker, no linoleum worn pale at the corners. It smelled clean and quiet, and the woman at the front desk knew her mother's name before Diane finished saying it, which made Diane go very still in the way she did when something exceeded her category of expected things. Dr. Menard was precise and unhurried. She laid out the options without making hope feel like a gift she might take back. There were interventions available. The blockage was significant, but the tissue was still viable. They had caught it in the window, she said, that particular phrase, in the window, and Norah had to press her thumbnail into her palm to keep her face still. On the drive home, Diane said, "Who made this happen?" "A family I helped," Norah said. She felt her mother looking at her profile. What kind of family? The kind that helps back. Diane was quiet for a long time, then she said, "Are you safe?" Norah thought about a stairwell at 2 in the morning. She thought about a card that said emergencies only. She thought about a man who stood in a hallway and could see every exit and still chose to look at her when he could have looked anywhere else. Yes, she said. Are you certain? She thought about it honestly, mostly. Diane made a sound that was not quite a laugh. That's the most truthful thing you've said to me in 3 months. Norah didn't deny it. She did not hear from Carter for 4 days. Then Isabelle called from a number Norah didn't recognize and asked if she would like to have coffee, and Norah said yes, because she had liked Isabelle from the moment the girl had laughed through 4 stitches and told her not to apologize for it. They met at a place on Rue Saint-Denis that Isabelle had chosen with the confidence of someone who had spent her whole life knowing which room she was welcome in. Isabelle arrived first and had already ordered, which Norah found funny and said so. I didn't know how long it would take you to get here, Isabelle said. You could have texted. I could have. She looked out the window at the street, but then you might have spent the ride over deciding whether to come. Norah sat down. That's very calculating for a 16-year-old. I'm 17. Practically a different person. Isabelle smiled. My father says you've been back to the hospital twice this week. Norah paused. He's keeping track. He keeps track of things he finds interesting. She said it without judgment. Are you going back tonight? Yes. She nodded slowly. He won't say this, himself. She traced the edge of her coffee cup. He doesn't say things like this, but he thinks about the stairwell. He thinks about the fact that you were the one who found me, and you stayed when you didn't have to, and you spent the night, and then the next day you were back on a 12-hour shift like it had just been another Thursday. She looked up. He doesn't know what to do with people who aren't impressed by him and aren't afraid of him either. Norah thought about that. What's the third option? Isabelle's expression was perfectly calm. People who just see him. The coffee between them went warm, then cool. Norah said, the boy from school, the one you went to the hospital for that night. Isabelle looked out the window. Marcus, he's doing better, his mother calls me. Does your father know? He knows now. She paused. He didn't send anyone, he asked me about it instead. Norah looked at her coffee. He's trying, Isabelle said quietly. He just has very few models for what that looks like. She went back to the hospital that night, and the night after, the ward continued its rotation of small emergencies and slow resolutions, and Norah moved through it the way she always had, except that now there was a card in her pocket with a different number on it, and every so often she would put her hand in her pocket and feel the edge of it without taking it out. 3 weeks after the stairwell, she was leaving through the east exit when she found Carter Westbrook outside. He was not standing the way men stood when they were waiting to be noticed. He was standing to the side of the entrance, coat collar up against the November cold, looking at the street with the particular patience of someone who had decided to be somewhere and was not going to perform the waiting. She stopped beside him. You could have called, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at the street. How's Isabelle? Angry with me about something different now, which I'm told is progress. Norah almost smiled. What did you do? I canceled a trip she wanted to take with friends because I sent someone with her, instead of asking if she wanted someone with her. He said it flatly. She explained the difference for 40 minutes. He paused. She sounds like her mother when she does that. Norah looked at him. What did you do after she explained it? I called the airline and rescheduled the trip for a week later. Then I asked her if she wanted someone to come, or if she wanted to handle the details herself. She said she wanted to handle it herself, but would Vince drive her to the airport because she likes Vince? His voice had changed when he said Vince, not softer, less armored. The kind of change that happened when a person stopped narrating events and started remembering them. Norah said, that sounds like progress to me. He turned his head. For a moment they looked at each other in the pale November light, two people who had arrived at the same point from opposite directions. You don't have to be afraid of me, he said. I'm not. Most people are. Most people, Norah said, don't work overnight shifts in a hospital. You stop being afraid of things you see at 2 in the morning. She held his gaze. I'm cautious, that's different. Carter was quiet for a moment. Then your mother's first follow-up is Thursday. I know, she already told me she's going alone because I hover. He almost smiled. Does she? She does not have the language for how much, Norah said, but she's not wrong. They stood in the cold another minute. A cab passed. The hospital doors opened and closed behind them. The city moved the way Montreal moved in November, not quiet but interior. Everyone slightly turned inward against the coming winter. Carter said, I don't do this well. Norah looked at him. What? He moved one hand in a gesture that seemed to encompass the entire situation. This, he said the word like it had edges, standing outside a hospital at 10 o'clock because I wanted to see if you were all right, and couldn't think of a less obvious way to do it. Norah felt something shift in her chest, quiet and significant. You could have sent Isabelle again, she said. I could have. He looked at her. I didn't want to. The cold moved between them. Norah said, my mother's appointment is at 10. After, she wants to walk along the canal because she says hospital waiting rooms make her feel like the world has stopped moving and she needs to see water. Carter listened. You could meet us there, Norah said, if you wanted to. She paused. My mother will ask you questions, probably too many. She'll want to know your opinion on the traffic situation on the Champlain Bridge and your preferred type of coffee, and whether you believe in raking leaves or mulching them. She'll decide something about you within the first 4 minutes, and she will not tell you what she decided. He was watching her. She's not easy to manage. Carter said, I don't manage people I respect. The sentence did something that Norah had not expected a sentence to do. She looked at her shoes. The left heel still had electrical tape on it. She had been meaning to replace it for 6 weeks. Thursday, she said, the canal, 11 o'clock. He nodded. She started toward the street and then stopped because something had been sitting at the edge of her mind since the stairwell, and she had not given herself permission to say it until now. The name, she said without turning. Renaud, did you speak to him? Carter was quiet for long enough that she turned around. I went to speak to him, he said. Isabelle asked me to wait. Did you wait? He held her eyes. Yes. Norah looked at him. What did she ask you to do instead? Carter's expression was unreadable, except that it wasn't entirely, not anymore. She asked me, he said, to let her handle it. She said she knew what had happened, and she knew what she wanted to say, and she didn't need me to go first. He paused. I waited outside. She was in there for 20 minutes. When she came out, she said it was done, and she wanted sushi. And was it? He said yes. He said it the way a person did when they were still deciding how to feel about the relief of it. She handled it herself. Norah looked at him in the November dark. He had the look of a man who had spent years building walls specific enough to keep the right things out, and had only recently noticed that the architecture had trapped him inside as well. She knew that look. She had worn it herself for 3 years. Thursday, she said again. He nodded once. She walked to the bus stop. The 45 came in 9 minutes, and she got on it and found a seat near the window and watched Montreal pass. At night, The lights bent and smeared against the glass, and she thought about a card in her pocket and a girl in a stairwell, and a man who had stood outside a hospital at 10 o'clock because he hadn't been able to think of a less obvious reason. She thought about her mother walking along the canal with water visible and the world still moving. She held the thought carefully, the way she had held the appointment paper for her mother that first morning, as if it might vanish if she trusted it too completely. Then she decided to trust it anyway. I keep thinking about the card. Not the one Isabelle had in her pocket, the one Carter gave me after, the one with a different number on it and no explanation attached. I didn't ask what it meant. I think that's the thing I come back to most. How often the right choice is the one that doesn't demand an explanation before it moves. Norah didn't stop in that stairwell because she calculated the outcome. She stopped because a girl was breathing wrong on a concrete floor, and walking away from that wasn't something she knew how to do. That's not heroism. That's just the kind of person you become when you've spent years doing the quiet, unglamorous work of showing up. Night after night, tired feet, electrical tape on a shoe heel, nobody watching. You don't make a grand decision in the stairwell. You've already made it over and over in every ordinary moment before it. I think about that a lot, the idea that who we are in a crisis is mostly just who we already were, finally visible. And then there's the other side of it. Carter standing outside a hospital at 10 o'clock, with no good reason he was willing to say out loud. He had spent years surrounding himself with people who moved when he moved and agreed when he spoke, and he had called it loyalty, the way people do when they can't tell the difference between loyalty and convenience. What broke that open wasn't a confrontation. It was a 17-year-old girl telling him calmly that she had handled it herself, and a woman who looked at him without adjusting her expression to match what he expected. There's something that takes real clarity of mind to do, to see a situation correctly when you're personally inside it, when the stakes are yours, when every instinct is pulling toward the familiar response. Norah heard a name in a hospital stairwell and filed it away without deciding what to do with it yet. She watched Miles redirect attention in a room and named the pattern without announcing it. That kind of thinking doesn't come from being unafraid. It comes from learning slowly to trust what you observe even when the room around you disagrees. Isabelle had it too. That's the part of this story I find most quietly remarkable. A 17-year-old who understood that asking her father to wait wasn't weakness and wasn't recklessness. It was judgment. It was her deciding what she was capable of and asking for exactly that amount of space, no more. And Diane, Norah's mother, who said, "I'll ask questions when I'm strong enough to survive the answers," and meant it, and walked into a room where someone was finally prepared to help her without making her feel like a problem being managed. That takes its own kind of strength, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just keeps going, keeps asking, keeps getting on the bus in the morning. What moves through all of them, I think, is something simpler than any philosophy I could name. Norah didn't abandon someone in a stairwell. Carter didn't move before he listened. Isabelle didn't let her father's fear become her own, and none of them got what they needed by making themselves smaller to fit someone else's idea of what they should be. I don't think outcomes like that are random. I think they follow quietly and without guarantee from the same source. People who decided what they stood for before the moment arrived to test it. The canal was still there on Thursday. The water was still moving. That was enough.